So another lucky escape for a buyer and for the seller of a property. Here, the recommendation was to have damp proofing treatment, but in fact, damp proofing treatment causes more damage to properties than it solves. And this is a very common example. Over 100 times more damp at the base of the wall is caused by leaks than caused by rising damp, especially in London, where groundwater, the root cause of rising damp, is pumped out. In fact, you don't find rising damp in London. The Kenwood, who surveyed the property and gave a rising damp quote, actually did spot the evidence of dampness but chose to ignore it, presumably because it would take 5 minutes to fix the problem if they just got a plumber to tighten up the nut. Now, all the clues were there. There's mold at the base of the wall, there's dampness in the neighbouring property, the property itself had been damp proofed, and yet the damp proofing was being breached by the leak. And in truth, the damp proof course is only a belt and braces against water at the base of the wall. But if you've got vapour in the subfloor void, it can condense above the damp proof course. And this is in part because of poor subfloor ventilation. But the root cause is the leak and not the subfloor ventilation. Just like a damp-proof course, subfloor ventilation is meant as a backstop in case you do get water into the subfloor, and then the air can blow it away. So the front of the building is there, and that's where the damp is, and this is where the leak was. And there's marginal dampness in the kitchen, but it's been damp-proofed, and is because there's no ventilation from the kitchen extractor fan, and there's a fridge here that will condense water behind it because there's too much vapour in this area and it's causing dampness there. The bathroom extractor fan was off. Now, whether it's always off, I don't know, but it runs fast enough. It seems to be a continuous flow. In London, there is no opportunity for groundwater because the groundwater is pumped out, but actually in this area it doesn't have groundwater bearing rocks anyway, so it would never be at risk of rising damp. This is an example of a property that was recently damp proofed by Kenwood. In this case, there were hygroscopic salts from the historic burning of coal from a chimney. But irrespective of that, you see the gap, the interface between the damp proofing treatment and the top. That is an area vulnerable. It's vulnerable to damp from other sources. And you can see it's called damp proofers ridge, and you get damp proofers condensation forming above. And that's where the high damp meter readings were. This is using a radio frequency damp meter, and you can see below the damp proofers ridge, it appears to be dry, and above it, it's damp. And that's because the condensation gets trapped in at the point of the interface between the two. So you could say that the damp proofer treatment increases the risk of damp, at least damp from condensation, and it hides damp from other sources, including a leak in this case, or penetrating damp in many cases. And even hygroscopic salts, which do come from groundwater, but also come from horse urine and from the burning of coal. So the slurry can hide that, but there's a much more modern, cheaper, more effective and quicker solution, and that's to use Zinza. But I'll be talking about that in a separate survey. So this is using the surface damp reading. I don't tend to do that because it marks the wall, but you will see that it's dry at the base of the wall but damp at the top of the wall, and that's because of the damp proofing treatment before. I don't know if the previous damp proofing treatment was through Kenwood. One of the big downsides of damp proofing treatment is, just to show you, that's the damp proof course. There's a slate damp proof course here. But one of the downsides of past damp proofing treatment is it hides damp, which carries on causing issues in the subfloor void and can cause rot. And there's a very small amount of rot in this It appears to be cellar rot. I don't think it's significant from a structural point of view, but you need to deal with the leak, otherwise you will carry on having a risk of rot. Deal with the leak, dry the subfloor out from the neighbour's side. I would use a fan, a dehumidifier. I would soak up the water in the first place with a towel, then use a fan, dehumidifier, and lock that second door so that people don't come in. You can see that the subfloor vent has been blocked by decking and by a hut outside. In the kitchen, there are also high damp meter readings, but the kitchen had no ventilation. There was no extractor fan from the hob, or at least it wasn't ducted out. The other thing is that the bathroom... other thing to note is that the fridge, next to the fridge, there's dampness, which looks like it looks like a leak because the brown staining on the side of the wall. But it's when you open up a fridge in a humid environment and you get condensation forming within the fridge, and then there's a little pipe at the back that drips into the mechanism, and that then vents out. But if there isn't sufficient ventilation behind the fridge, which there isn't in this case, then you can get condensation forming on the base of the wall. I would just keep this kicker board open so that you get ventilation under the fridge. You can see the brown staining. It acts like a leak. It's the same sort of situation that you had in the corridor, where there's that brown staining. It looks very much like a leak, and it's from the extractor fan. You can see it's causing the air to flow coming through those ducts there. So passive vents aren't much use. You need airflow on the outside, and anyway they get blocked up over time by spiders' webs, etc. I would block it up, insulate it. The bathroom extractor fan was switched off at the isolator, so presumably it wasn't working. Either way, it seems to be operating at about 6 litres a second, which means it's probably in continuous mode. I know this fan, but I don't know the mechanism, but it's a humidistat with timer, and you can just look it up and change the jumper setting so that it runs effectively. I don't know the best setting for your particular environment, but if you are ever selling a property and leaving it vacant, or in fact just leaving a property vacant for any length of time, you really should be running a dehumidifier. It will save you so much money. A dehumidifier set at 70% relative humidity, is kept dripping into a kitchen sink, will cost probably between about 50p and £1 a day in winter, and it saves so much money on energy. You don't need to be heating the property above more than maybe about 3 degrees centigrade, and it will reduce the risk of mold and condensation. The other thing to say about hygroscopic, so groundwater contains hygroscopic salts, but so do other things, and it's very rare for groundwater to be the cause of hygroscopic salts, and there's no sign of hygroscopic salts in this property. Anyway, you do not get mold where you've got hygroscopic salts, and in the front bay you can see there's mold, and that's mold from excess vapor, and that's because there was no dehumidifier left on while the property was vacant. So anyway, have a look at the description below, and I'll put my recommendations, findings, and next actions.
So that's normal there, normal there, entirely normal. Normal. This is Damp Proofer's ridge. you often get dampness just above it. So it's typical damp proof is ridge, where damp proofing treatment causes condensation to condense. It's a bit like a swimming pool, so it's, you see, and you often get calcium sulfate crystals forming there. I think, I mean, all damp proofers, but I particularly notice it on Kenwood type damp proofing. I'll show you some examples of terrible damp proofers ridge. And in that case, it took only a few minutes to solve the problem, and it cost nothing. If you get to the root cause, you don't have to have damp proofing. Damp proofing, probably, I mean, it's a marketing term, and this is from the fridge, because the condensation forms behind the fridge. So you really should keep the kicker out. You'll get reduced airflow at the back of the fridge.
So this is an example of what could happen if you bought the property and you had damp proofing treatment. In this case, it was Kenwood. This was a survey I did in August 2018. There had been damp proofing treatment before the purchase. Kenwood didn't accept that there was a claim under the rising damp guarantee. They charged an extra $5,000 to extend the damp proofing treatment. And then when I came at this stage, they were quoting another $16,000, and it ended up to be just this fan that was defective, and I solved it during the survey. And the other thing is that there was rot. This was a solid floor, but there was rot within the timber. And the client sent me back this image about 5 years afterwards, and no problem with damp, and all sorted. Happy clients, no more cost. If you take a root cause approach to fixing damp, you'll fix it forever. Otherwise, you'll keep chasing your tail and hiding the symptoms, not solving the problem.